Welcome to the Unpick podcast, our second part of our 2020 year in review. Okay, so now we're at July, the halfway point in the year. We'd all spent months locked up indoors. It was roasting outside. There was a heat wave. Everybody was just ready to just have a break from the pandemic, go outside. And the government announced this Super Saturday. I don't know if you remember, but there were sort of tweets from the Treasury saying, go support your local pub. We've reached a truce with, with the virus. Go spend money to get the economy starting. But inevitably, that was going to be a super spreading Saturday. And it's just confused messaging between look after yourself, stay alert, stay away, but spend money. When Super Saturday came, all you saw on our screens were packed bars in Soho, packed beaches in Bournemouth. And I don't blame them, because not everybody has a garden. Not everybody has a space where they can go to get some air. Do you remember the first day when life felt maybe semi-normal to you? So you'd been locked up all these months. What was the kind of first normal day for you?
Oh, I don't know if I can even say I have had a semi-normal day. It's always been playing in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
I think I've had moments where they felt quite nice and quite relaxed, and that's when I was in public, in a park, very, very far away from people, really social distancing and not having to wear my mask. Those are the moments I felt quite normal and relaxing. So yeah, I didn't participate in Super Saturday. I didn't do any of that. I just stayed at home, stayed local, didn't really leave my postcode.
I remember this very clearly because the newspapers are saying, we've got Super Saturday coming, we're unlocking the economy, we're opening up. And I remember walking to the end of the road and for the first time hearing one of these heavy trucks for the first time in months. And just feeling anxious. And that first week in July was just such an anxious week for me because, I'd got used to the quiet. I could go outside, I could hear the birds, I could go for a nice peaceful walk. Suddenly, the traffic started coming. Look, I had to look both ways when I was crossing the road.
For the first time in a long time. Yeah.
I went to do my kind of weekly shop or my, couple of days shop. The queue reached to the outside of the supermarket. And I just felt so detached when everyone else is looking forward to kind of going back to normal. I'd got used to this quieter, slower life. And I just wasn't looking forward to things opening up again. How was it for you when things started getting back to normal? The noise, the crowds?
I think for me, all of this, it didn't allow me to fully relax and to fully feel like normal because I knew that all of this would bring about the second wave.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't had a run up to the opening up. We hadn't had a consistent message for a month up to, the opening about social distancing, about masking. I didn't feel like the government's messaging was very clear. I didn't feel like the government I didn't feel like the government was well prepared for this. And every time I saw the beaches, the pubs, I just kept thinking, second wave. We're going to have a second wave. And obviously now we know in December that we've had a second wave, and it came about a lot faster than the first one. It's a lot more worrying. And so for me, I none of this made me feel at ease. And I liked the quieter pace. I liked not having to commute because I before did a very, very, very long commute. So it was nice to have a sort of a slower pace of life, and working from home is something I've never done before. Just my line of work just doesn't allow for that. And so it was nice to be at home, but it just felt, because it wasn't out of choice. And once again, it did feel like an imprisonment. But all I just kept thinking was Super Saturday is just second wave for me.
You're right. And I think that was the moment where, if the Dominic Cummings story had undermined the government's message, July was the moment where the government completely lost control of the messaging. This was roughly the point where we went from protect the NHS to stay alert, which no one knew what that meant.
What did that even mean? Yeah.
Things were looking almost back to normal. But some people were wearing masks, but it felt like people were just behaving for whatever reason as if the pandemic wasn't real. I just had this impending sense of doom that one would be back in lockdown pretty soon. And it would have been for nothing, because by then we'd seen at least, I think, 20, 30,000 deaths. August. What happened in August? It was a long time ago.
August was the ETAT to Help Out scheme, which is a follow through about, return to normalcy, return to just a normal way of life. Everything's
Yeah,
back to normal. And I didn't participate. Did you?
I used it a couple times, but I know lots of people didn't and were wary about going to restaurants.
Yeah, I was one of those people. This year for me made me feel like a conspiracy theorist in the sense that I didn't trust the government. I almost wanted instinctively to do the opposite. The government tells me to go left, I want to go right and keep right for the rest of my life.
If August was the month of eat out to help out, September was go back to the office to help out Pret. It really was.
September was the continuation of this message of
Yeah.
return to normalcy, and for those of us who felt like things were not normal, we just felt crazy.
There were these warnings from the business community that all these places that rely on lunchtime traffic, commuter traffic,
Yeah,
were suffering. Pret, your subways. That's true. That's not made up. But the government was
yeah.
putting pressure on people to go back to the offices.
Mm.
Companies realized we can work from home. We don't need to be paying these exorbitant central London rents, especially if you're a small
Yeah.
business or a medium-sized business. And so the government tried to force people to go back to the office, tried to force public workers to go back to the office, reopened schools. But after 3 months of partying, 3 months of cavorting with the virus,
Yeah.
the numbers were steadily on the increase. If I remembered correctly, at the end of September, cases were rising more quickly than they did in March
Mm-hmm.
when the government was forced to go into lockdown. So the situation was worse at the end of September, but lockdown was it seemed like a distant prospect.
See, this is the interesting thing about how the government responded to different pressures. So you have some industries which obviously benefit from a lockdown, people staying at home, and some parts of the economy and some other industries that didn't. And I believe that the government should have cut through all of that noise and just followed the scientific evidence, because there was talk about there's a wave, shut down, everything goes back down, cases and deaths, and then people then re-emerge, another wave.
And to top it all off, I remember Boris saying this would all be over by Christmas. A wave of optimism that it's all going to be over.
Mm-hmm.
Do whatever you want because in 6 months' time we'll be asking pandemic who dat.
Yes. I think also a lot of that was precipitated by news of the vaccine. So there were different vaccine trials, ongoing vaccine trials. There were a lot of promising results coming out. And I think also going back to the thing about the government was pushing people to work, I think there's also an element of shaming, because the Daily Mail was saying, well, your kids are back at school. Why aren't
Yeah,
you
I
at
remember
work?
that line. Yeah.
Like, you bum, right? You're a bum if you don't, you're weak and you're a scaredy cat and you're a coward if you can't get on the train, potentially infect yourself, but do it for the economy, do it for the nation. And what we'll see, hindsight is always 2020. What we see now is this sense of optimism carrying as normal now was completely unwarranted because the virus didn't go anywhere.
Hindsight for this government has not been 2020 because it means looking back and seeing things more clearly
And learning lessons.
and learning lessons. One of the attacks on Keir Starmer has been Captain Hindsight. The number of times the government has had to U-turn that have happened again and again. It's Groundhog Day. They
Mm.
just haven't learned from any lessons, either from our experience or from what's happening across the world.
Yes, and I think this follows on through, because this is the pro-Brexit government, right?
Yeah.
And Brexit, and even the run up to Brexit is this belief that experts are not experts. If you feel something as an ordinary person with no expert education or no expert experience, because it's not purely just about education, right? Somehow it's okay. You trump doctors, nurses, people who have spent their entire professional lives studying and researching these issues, right? So there's a sense of, yes, SAGE, which is the government group of advisors, the government, the chief scientist, the universities, all the institutions that we have in this country who monitor these sorts of diseases, produce models. It doesn't matter because we feel it's okay for you to go back to school, go back to work. None of the government advice about when we should have gone back to work, all of that was something that was backed by science, because it was the same scientists saying that you need to have a level of lockdown. And it may not be as extreme as the first one where no one's allowed to go anywhere, but there needs to be this idea that there is an ongoing pandemic. It constantly has to be at the back of your mind. You don't participate in activities that you don't need to, because this virus will get you, and it has gotten thousands of people.
Yeah. So that brought the end of I think, looking back, it seemed like a positive summer because I think it was bright and it was sunny, but I think it
That's
stored
just
up a lot of
summer.
problems.
That's just summer being summer. Has nothing to do with anything.
That is so true. Yeah.
Being summer, Boris gets no credit for this.
But it stored a lot of problems for us, right?
Mm. In November, here at home, we went into another lockdown, which is not surprising because we had a summer. Like you said, we were cavorting with the corona. And so, of course, we then had to go and sit down back in our houses for another lockdown. But in America, they finally had the elections. The polls had predicted that Biden was going to win. I think the predictions were he was going to win it was a blue wave. I think the blue wave was what was predicted. And we didn't quite get that. But Biden did win. But Trump had spent most of the year casting doubt on the electoral process. He had rallied against mail-in ballots, voter fraud, issues with ID laws. It was not surprising that he then took these states to court about issues with the electoral process. It was only states that had said that Biden had won. And some of these majorities were slim. So, like, for example, in Georgia, Biden's win was very slim by a few thousand. Same with, I think it was Pennsylvania, Michigan. And so a recount, there was no issue with the recount, but there was an issue with the fact that he just refused to concede. And that just didn't look really good, especially for America, because America spends a lot of time, and rightfully so, pointing to other countries when they don't have fair and free elections. And you saw the exact same thing. It was a coup, wasn't it?
Yeah. So this is for the Pokemon fans out there.
Which is not me. Because I've never watched Pokemon. It's Pokemon with the cards.
No, that's Yu-Gi-Oh!
Same thing.
Today, I randomly was watching it on Netflix. Pokemon Indigo League, Season 1, Episode 8. There's this moment when Ash challenges AJ to a fight. AJ beats him easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ash goes in this rant. In fact, I'm just pulling it up now so I can read it to you verbatim.
Okay.
And you tell me that he's lost, right?
Yeah.
And he's crying. And AJ's like, stop whining, kid. Nobody wants to compete against a crybaby. Ash, hey, there's something fishy here. I didn't have any problem winning until I battled in your ring. How do I know this whole match wasn't rigged? That's it. You cheated.
Oh,
That is word for word Trump.
word for word.
The whole dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Ash is saying to AJ, oh, it must be because it's in your backyard. Literally every argument. So Trump is saying he lost because of democratic cities or democratic mayors.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat here in amazement just thinking, the most powerful man in the world could learn a lesson from an episode of Pokemon.
It's the idea of Trump learning lessons. Trump.
That you're having difficulty
Yes,
with.
it's that bit. I don't see Trump learning any lessons. But it's you know what? It's a coup. It's an attempt of a coup. Let's not forget that bit.
It definitely was a coup.
Is because he still has not conceded as of December, like the 27th of December, which is today.
First, it was a farce. And then it's slowly becoming fascism because you've got people saying he should overrule Congress. He should overrule the judges.
Mm-hmm. Martial law. They love a martial law. Oh my goodness. Every day martial law.
You know, one of the big stories of the election was Kamala Harris as the first female vice president, that was lost. I read an article the other day that said part of what Trump is doing is because he's jealous of all the attention that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are getting. So he's increasing Trumpian antics are because he feels that he's slowly becoming irrelevant. Yesterday, he tweeted Melania Trump has not been on the covers of any of the big fashion magazines. And that's evidence of the elitism or the snobbery of the mainstream media.
He didn't tweet that. I refuse to believe he tweeted
We are
that.
in the middle of a pandemic.
Oh my goodness.
He's just towards the end of his failed coup, and I hope it's a failed coup. I don't trust the Republicans not to pull something at the last minute. One of the things for me from the whole election was how important it is to be in power. All those people 4 years ago who said they couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton because she was a centrist, she was right-wing. I have no beef with that. She might have been all those things. I happen to think she was those things. But there's a difference between somebody who respects the rule of law, who respects norms, who respects the institutions and establishment. That is a big difference between that, but we disagree with that person on policy issues, than somebody who's a law unto themselves. There's a big difference. What is this obsession with purity? Somebody has to agree with me 100% up all the time. You asked me earlier about Joe Biden. I saw some of the responses to Joe Biden winning. People saying, the resistance starts now. And these people on the left, the resistance to Trump hasn't even ended.
Absolutely. And I think we must be able to differentiate between bad and worse, right? Because at the time of her running, Hillary Clinton's promises and policies had some of the most progressive things in them that in recent in recent memory, right? Yes, Hillary has shady things in her past, absolutely, but Hillary's not the person who, as she's running, is saying that if I don't win, there's a problem with the system, right? That's something that Trump said before he'd even won the first time as he was running, that if I win, fair is fair. If I lose, something's bad's happened. And it's something that we are going to talk about, this idea of ideological purity and how for some of us on the left, we can't see past that. If you don't adhere to my belief every single point, then it's a problem. Because I think that we all have to set the limit to what we can support, right? So I understand someone saying, I won't support a climate change denier. That's a fair point. But let's not be like a lot of people on the right who are single issue voters, because life is not about single issues. For example, Biden is a Catholic. Privately, he has an interesting record on, for example, abortion. It's a big issue. Personally, he is anti-abortion, but look at his policies. If his policies are generally allowing women to make their own choices, if that's something that you agree with, which is something I happen to agree with, then that can be the issue that you draw the line at. I mean, of course, people are allowed to draw the lines wherever they may wish, but if you truly want change, and it's something that we've talked about before, and you've said that change is incremental. It's not always massive leaps and bounds.
I understand the argument that says people like Hillary Clinton, people like Joe Biden, maybe even people like Obama, certainly Bill Clinton, they serve to maintain the status quo and to present a kind of light progressivism that essentially doesn't disrupt too much. So if you look at, say, inequality under democratic leaderships in recent decades, has it gone down by much? Not really. It's maintained the status quo, but just because Obama did things we like equal marriage or social policies, the fundamental economic structures have not changed. I understand that critique. I agree with a lot of it. It's valid.
And it's valid.
These things that get thrown into kind of social box, or, if you like, and that's something we'll talk about, fake culture war, they matter to people. Whether or not you can walk safely on the street is as important as the big economic structural changes. So Obama might not have delivered everything we wanted, but if you were gay, if you're a person of color in America, those were 8 better years for you than the last 4 years have been. And that matters a lot. So we'll have to see how Biden's presidency shapes out. But I think, to me, it's a positive step.
Absolutely. But also the bar is so low that anyone who is not Trump is better. In an ideal world, we wouldn't get that, but that's okay. We should be able to allow people to celebrate that. We should allow people to feel a sense of relief. Like you were saying, this idea of the resistance begins now. No, maybe for Biden, the attempt to pivot begins now, because you should attempt to change and shift policies. But it's not, I don't believe it's an act of resistance, because I don't think Biden is as conniving. And I don't want to use moralistic language and say evil, but the Biden administration is not going to be as bad as the Trump administration. The Keir Starmer administration, if he does ever become prime minister in the UK, is not going to be as
Yeah.
bad as Boris Johnson, Theresa May. And it is okay to say that. And to say that doesn't mean that we now support Keir Starmer
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. He is our king. We uplift him in every single thing that he does. But what it does mean is that we give him a chance. If he does things that we agree with, good. If he doesn't do, we are involved in shaping that policy. It is okay to call out
Yeah.
people on the left, people that you support, for things that they do that you don't agree with, that in your view are wrong. And just to be clear, we're not saying wholehearted support of your party, for example.
Yeah.
No. We don't want people to be blind partisans,
Yeah.
but we want people to be fair. And also have a dash of real politics. Be pragmatic.
At the end of the day, it's still a democracy. 70 million people did vote for the other guy. We can't just ignore those facts on the ground. And if there's some concessions we can make that mean that our person wins next time, I think those are worth looking at and worth making. There's one thing I know for certain. It would be easier to get the changes we want with a Corbyn premiership than it would be with a Boris premiership. I know a lot of us didn't like Corbyn or didn't think his style of leadership was the right style of leadership.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, if you as a person on the left can't make a distinction between Boris and Corbyn, can't make a distinction between Trump and Hillary, you need to reevaluate what your priorities are. Because the corona pandemic is different under a Clinton administration. That means less people dying. That means less economic damage. The response to
Absolutely.
BLM is fundamentally different under a Clinton administration. How do you build a platform that brings in most of the people some of the time and not some of the people all the time?
Yes, and it's also about big tent politics. And it's something
Yeah.
that if you are, if you're interested in politics, it's maybe a term that you've come across, consensus building. And it's something that people on the right do extremely well. They're able to
Yeah.
leave their differences at the door if the campaign at the moment is about an issue that they all agree with. There are people on the right who are pro-choice, will leave that at the door if it means supporting a candidate who agrees with the economic policy. And that's something on the left.
Yeah.
It's something we need to learn to do. And it doesn't mean that you then abdicate your ideology, your ideas, things that you support. It just means that you see the bigger picture. And by the way, the bigger picture is going to be very different for different people. And so we individually, we will have our own idea, but let's really think about how we build consensus. Like you said, Keir Starmer is not, if you are one of those people who you want a revolution, you want the normal is something that you don't agree with, you don't like how things are done, you don't want the business as usual politics.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer may be a stepping stone to that more than Boris Johnson.
The points we're making apply
Yeah.
to everybody on the left. So it's not just people on the quote unquote far left to be more accommodating to people who are more to the center. Those people in the Democratic Party who spend more time attacking AOC than they do the Republicans. Those people in the Labour Party who spend more time attacking Corbyn than they do the Tories. The whole essence of Big Ten politics is understanding we're all fundamentally on the same side. I'm inherently suspicious of anybody who spends more time attacking any politician on the left than they do the Tories.
So in December, what was the big news in December?
The vaccines are here. Tell us. Was it a Christmas miracle?
Yeah, it was. It was actually a miracle of publicly funded state education.
Say that again for those in the back.
It is a miracle of publicly funded state institutions that work for the betterment of humanity and not for profit. Money is not the central thing that they focus on. And in the UK, we had the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. We had Moderna in America. We also had the Pfizer BioNTech, which is a partnership. So we've had, I think, so far 3 vaccines which are going to be rolled out over the next year. The safety profiles look pretty good. Hopefully, by the end of next year, most people on the planet will have had the vaccines. We're the first country to license and to approve these vaccines, and that's a good thing. That's something that's going to save lives. That's going to reduce the burden on the NHS. The NHS can get back to business as usual of cancer screenings, of just basic care for people. Did you see Matt Hancock crying? I felt like I don't want to be a cynic. I'm pretty sure he felt relief, but I feel like the relief he felt was more that he was so happy he could finally get back to selling off the NHS
Yeah.
and not deal with COVID and every 2 seconds
Yeah.
being asked about why are thousands of people dying? Why is test and trace not working? You promised us X amount of tests. And yeah, I think he was just finally happy to be done. Will you take the vaccine when your turn arrives, if your turn arrives?
Definitely. I understand why a lot of people are hesitant about the vaccine. But again, that's because the government has done a poor job of explaining how have we managed to get a vaccine in a year.
Absolutely. And this is the first time I'd come across the term of vaccine hesitancy.
Yeah.
I just thought there was, you get the vaccine or you're an anti-vaxxer. I didn't know there was a group in the middle. And like you said, if you're someone who you're a bit reluctant to get a vaccine, a year ago I would have said you're an anti-vaxxer. But now, after seeing how our government has responded to the pandemic, has been slow to respond, has been corrupt, there's been a lack of transparency. I understand someone saying, I'm going to wait, I'm going to see how many heads explode before I commit to getting it myself. I commit my children, my loved ones. I completely understand that. And I hope, let me not be too cynical. I think this is just the start of the rollout, but I hope that when the capability to have a lot more people vaccinated, that the NHS does come forward and does show people how, like you said, how this vaccine came about.
Yeah.
We'd seen Matt Hancock, who's the health minister, talk about, something that ordinarily takes 10 years has been brought about in 10 months. That is an incredibly irresponsible thing to say because that is not true. I mean, the flu vaccine is revamped every year. It doesn't take 10 years. Right? We're in 2020. We're not in the 1910s where some of the first vaccines are just coming out. We have such incredible new technologies and platforms to mass produce these vaccines. And that's something that I hope the BBC and other, broadcasters and networks take on the story and go and speak to some of these scientists and see what was for them. Some of us were at home. They were not at home. They were working. What did that look like on a day-to-day basis when they were running clinical trials? It's a really interesting story, and I hope that it's something that someone does a documentary about and really educates the public on the really good work the scientists are doing, and they're doing it, and they're poorly paid.
The Conservatives have spent the last 10 years gutting the public sector, right? Cutting the NHS, reducing the amount of nurses. And also their friends on the Daily Mail and other right-wing newspapers have spent the last 5 years denigrating junior doctors, denigrating teachers, denigrating firefighters. All of a sudden, the same people are calling us to applaud the public sector, clap for our carers. And then it's people who've been attacking higher education, attacking experts. And all of a sudden, Matt Hancock, you're crying on national TV because of the vaccine. You have done nothing. This would have happened with or without you. So let's not let people who spent the last 10 years literally undermining our ability to respond to the pandemic try to take credit for the work of others.
Absolutely. And laying down the foundation for mistrust of experts and institutions. It's sort of like it's okay for us to put our trust in big businesses, private companies who promise to, have corona tests available, to have PPE. But the people who their work is going in and finding cures and finding answers to some of these big health questions, we shouldn't trust them because somehow scientists have a moneyed interest in their outcomes. I promise you that you're not going to find those scientists who develop these vaccines, the Oxford vaccine in particular, because I just happen to know the story a bit better than the others. They're not going to be billionaires tomorrow. The deal that Oxford University signed with AstraZeneca made sure that AstraZeneca produces these vaccines at cost for poorer nations, made sure that these vaccines are accessible. They can be produced by other companies across the world so that more people in the developing world get access to these vaccines. So this is not about money. This is not about becoming wealthy. This is just about pursuing good public health. And yet these are the people we shouldn't trust. But somehow we should trust when, for example, BP tell us they're not polluting in our waters. They're not polluting. They have our interests at heart. Something that we are going to talk about in our subsequent episodes. And it's something that we've got a very special series planned for the coming year. Some things about power and how power is distributed and organized. And we're going to take a closer look into essentially how power is organized in our society and whether that's a fair thing.
Yeah. And despite all this good news, and maybe because of all this good news, the government was like, okay, for 5 days in December, we have reached a ceasefire with Corona. You can basically meet up with a couple of the households. I think it was 3 households in total. It also gave license to people in London to basically just travel anywhere. So for years, we've been talking about wealth distribution, right? We need to distribute the wealth from London to the rest of the country. The government took a different approach and said we need to distribute the high rates of COVID-19 in London to the rest of the country. So if you live in London, hop on the train and go see your grandma in rural Wiltshire. I mean, like, seriously, anybody with a common sense looked at this and thought this is a bad idea. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist for 5 days. So inevitably, was it 2 days before Christmas or 3 days?
I think it was about 3 days. But it was a few days. It was a run up to it.
A couple of days, right?
With the whole new.
Every day just melts into the next. The government did what it's been doing very well the whole year. It did yet another U-turn. And my favorite moment was when Hancock was asked why he'd promised it. And he said, because he knows how much Christmas matters to people.
What about their grandmothers who are not grandfathers and grandmothers and parents and loved ones who are not here? How about that?
You gave false hope in early December because you know how much Christmas matters to people. Are you a psychopath or something? I had to rewind this a couple of times. I couldn't understand this. But yet again, even in a month when we had good news, but the government just had to tell people, look, it's almost here. Wait a couple weeks. Let's sit this Christmas out. No, you had to go and tell people they could have Christmas. So people planned. People spent money. People made very difficult decisions about who to spend Christmas with. And then a couple of days before, London and most of the Southeast, Tier 4, which meant basically lockdown. Everywhere else in the country, the 5 days of frivolity cut down to 1.
It doesn't make sense. And I've stopped trying to understand these decisions because they doesn't seem to be a rhyme or a reason as to how these decisions are made. And then there was the news about the new variant that was spreading faster.
Yeah.
It wasn't causing more disease, thankfully. It didn't seem to be any worse, but it just was spreading faster. And so that was one of the main reasons where we had to lock down. And when Matt Hancock said it's out of control, and suddenly every country, I think it was loads of European countries, just said, no one can come in. We don't want British people coming in. And suddenly there was this whole, how dare they lock us out? Well, that's something we would have done. And it's something that we did in the first lockdown where we said we're not, and something that we should have done a lot sooner. We shouldn't have accepted people from Italy without a test. We should have tested people at our borders. But suddenly there was this shock that how dare these countries stop us from coming in?
So at the time of recording, the Brexit deal has been signed, but we've not had a chance to read it and digest it. So we should do a Brexit special at some point. Who knows what the new Brexit deal and the coronavirus will mean in 2021. We'll definitely be with you every step of the way. We will condense what we think are the important stories that matter to you. And we'll also pull out what we think are the most interesting trends and themes of the year as they happen.
And we also have some bonus material related to this episode, so watch out for that. And also, we're planning a special. We want to explain how we've got here, why our politics looks the way it is. And we're going to talk about power, authoritarianism. We're going to talk about fascism. We're going to talk about corporate power and how that's been consolidated.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our first episode. It's been, hey, we're learning, right? It's a learning journey.
Please forgive us for all our mistakes, for we have sinned. Also, we haven't introduced ourselves. People don't know who we are. Who are we? Who are you?
And I'm K, and the K stands for King.
I'm keeping that bit as a blooper. I'm gonna find a way to bring that in. I don't care. I don't care if it's this episode. I don't care if it's the next episode. That is coming with us.
I'm K.
Mm-hmm.
Plus say, and your
Mm-hmm.
S.
Oh, right. I thought you were gonna give people some more sauce on that rice.
I've been one of your hosts, K.
Yeah, MS. Been the other host.
What if I say,
A few moments later.
and this is the Unpicked podcast brought to you by me, K, and my co-host,
S, and we'll be here every 2 weeks. We'll be giving you fortnightly reviews on politics, culture, other things that catch our eye throughout the year.
and just dank memes.
Dank memes.